as it's the first time we're talking, I'd love to just like take you way back, if you don't mind, to like when the performer in you sort of first emerged, how that kind of manifested itself in your life.
Yeah, I asked my mother not too long ago when's the first time I said I wanted to be an actor. And she said it was before you could talk. And I said, Mom, I said when's the first time I said I want to be an actor? She said, no, seriously, it was before you could talk. You would walk in front of the television, your favorite shows would be on, and you would just bounce. And I think, as my mother is a teacher and a pastor, she said it's the parent's job to look at the natural proclivities that God has given the child and to help guide those things. My mom and dad went through a crazy kind of like toxic together and not together around the time I was in middle school. And while she's this pastor and this amazing teacher, he was a blue collar worker, man of the people, but he was secretly hiding that he was a drug dealer and was dealing to upper management at work until he got hooked on drugs. And he was in and out of rehab for about 22 years until he kicked the habit. And now we're like best friends. I hated him at the time though. And so middle school was a really hard time for me. All of my friends were changing. Girls were wearing heels. And now it was just, everything was being odd. Everybody was trying to be too cool for school. And the arts kind of saved my life. I didn't have a refuge at home. I didn't have a refuge at school. And the arts became a safe space for me. And so my aunt Brenda got me my first improv class in middle school. I fell in love with it. I ended up auditioning for a performing arts high school called Carver Center for the Arts and Technology in Baltimore, Maryland, in Baltimore County. And I was a theater major, music minor focus. And so I fell in love. I fell in love with the arts. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I knew I loved music because I sang in church all my life. I knew I loved theater because it was a safe haven and a refuge for me. I got a full ride to University of Maryland, Baltimore County, but I wasn't in love with the theater program at the time. I didn't know if I really wanted to do theater. I didn't know if I wanted to do musical theater. But then I saw a show called Rent and I lost my mind. I thought to myself, this is the perfect combination of using the arts for some form of a purpose. These people are not just singing on stage, they're singing because the stakes are so high within these characters, and the stakes are so high within the world they exist in, that words are no longer enough. They have to sing. And so I was bitten by the musical theater bug then, and I started skipping school. I started skipping school to go to New York City and audition. I actually did get into audition for Rent, and I got all the way up to directors and producers, and they said, "How old are you?" And I was like, "I'm 17." And they're like, "You're a little young for Collins and for Benny, but you got some talent. So come back in a few years." Then my mother found out that I was skipping school. Um, she wasn't upset because I still had a 3.98 GPA, but she wouldn't let me keep going to New York to audition. She said, you can do this for the rest of your life, but a degree and an education will be something that no one can ever take away from you. So the compromise was that I would not go to NYU and continue to skip school and audition. I would go to Temple University in Philadelphia. So I went there. I got my equity card at a really beautiful theater called Freedom Theater. That was there in Philadelphia, kind of a staple of the Black theater community there. And I got my first professional gig in, I think that was 1999, 2000, something like that. While I was there, I got a class at Temple called Performing for the Profession, or Theater for the Profession. And I thought, this is the mix I've been waiting for. It's professional and it's school. And it was not theater for the profession. It was audition for grad school class. And I was like, great, more school. Ugh. So I went to the head of the department at the time and I said, we're auditioning for all these schools, but what about like the big schools? What about Yale and Juilliard and NYU? And she said, well, Bryan, I really think you should just focus on these schools that are at the ERDAs that we're auditioning for. It's a great program and you're going to do really well. So I was like, yeah, and started skipping school again. This time to audition for the big ones. And I went back into her office and she said, see, Bryan, I told you do an amazing job. You got all of these requests from the program that want to see you. And I said, well, I'm also in callbacks for Lion King, some show called All My Children that my grandmother watches. And I also got into Yale and NYU. So now we've got some decisions to make. Decided to go to Yale School of Drama. And that education, I call it jail school of drama because it was so intense, but it really prepared me for a life as an artist. It takes a lot of discipline and it takes a lot of experience in different mediums and different forms of storytelling. And it prepared me for a life journey as an artist, as opposed to just coming out to Hollywood and becoming famous. And all of that history that I just told you has prepared me for the juggernaut that is this moment in my life. I've got Carnegie Hall next Friday, 78-piece orchestra with the New York Pops and Stephen Reinke. A few days later, I premiere a TV show that I am so proud of called Diarra From Detroit, where I play a very open, queer best friend to the lead. I'm kind of her husband at work as a teacher.
I like that, yeah, husband.
Such a husband. And I realized, I'm filling in a role in the queer tapestry of storytelling that we don't often get a chance to see. I feel the same thing in this role that I felt when I was younger, kind of coming up and finding my way in my sexuality, which is that it was really hard for me to look at the landscape of Hollywood and see myself. It was either hyper feminine or hyper masculine. All of the hyper feminine leaned itself, I think, a little bit more into a world that I admired, but I didn't feel a part of. And the hyper masculine, if you're a gay man, a bisexual man, a queer man from cities like I'm from, like Baltimore, Philly, New York, Detroit, all of those people on television were being depicted as DL and on the down low. So there was no me. We didn't have a lot of Neil Patrick Harris's and a lot of, what I'm seeing in the Fellow Travelers, these great performers. We didn't have those as people of color growing up. And so the fact that I get to offer this character in Diarra From Detroit named Mr. T, who feels like your brother, your cousin, your uncle, all the people I actually know, is a gift. It's a huge gift because there's an authenticity in this role that I've yet to be able to play since 1999. So I'm really excited. That's kind of my journey in a short nutshell.
Yes. And yeah, I love the character too. I mean, one thing I loved in episode 2, he makes eyes with the DJ, and then kind of, something might happen there between them. Because so often when we have had like a gay best friend character, they're sort of there for the quippy one-liners, but we don't really get to see like their full life, or we get to hear a bit about Mr. T's sex life too, and it's really funny that the dialogue is great, and I'm just hooked on the show Diarra From Detroit. It's fantastic. I'm excited for people to see it. But yeah, so tell me a little bit more about that character, I guess, and maybe what input you had in it, because obviously I know you're friends with Diarra in real life too.
Yeah, we've been friends since 2007, and she based a lot of the character on me. It's funny because there are lines in the first episode that I literally said to her out loud that ended up on the page. But one of the things that I thought was really, really important is that he didn't fall into a lot of the tropes and stereotypes that we see, like you said, with the gay best friend. He's not like the sassy gay best friend. He is a truth teller, so he gets great one-liners, but they're grounded. And what was really important for me was that in her group of friends, every single one of them has a love interest. And I wanted to make sure that Mr. T got a love interest as well. And so we get a little bit of a peek in this first season, not only of him having a real relationship with someone, but also his point of view around relationships. I love that when we meet him, he's so where I used to be as a real person. It's like, I'm married now. My wedding was very public. It was in the New York Times. But Mr. T is in this place where he's not really into the one-on-one relationship right now. I think a lot of his life is very stable. He's a school teacher. He knows what that life is. He's got his friends. He was an all-American sports player. He sang the national anthem at the game that he won, back in the day when he was playing. And now he's an earth science teacher and he's kind of like got his life. But when it comes to the fellas, he's just trying to have some fun. Nothing's supposed to be too serious. And then you get this DJ. And I can't wait for everyone to see where this goes. This is one of those relationships where Mr. T is like, I can't get rid of this guy. I think Diarra is really pushing him to open up to the possibility of love because Diarra is a hopeless romantic. So much to the point where she would actually go down the rabbit hole and look for a guy that ghosted her. Kind of ridiculous. Whereas Mr. T is the opposite. He's like, let him go and hop on like 3 or 4 or 5 more dicks. Like we don't need to be in a situation where we're, over romanticizing one date. But what we find in Mr. T's journey is that he himself really deep down could potentially be a hopeless romantic as well.
Yeah. And what was it like bringing that, creating the on-screen friendship with Diarra, given that you are friends in real life? It's really fun to watch.
Thank you. It's really interesting because I'm living inside of an answered prayer. I had these fantasies of whenever I would do a series regular that I would go to work and whenever the ensemble cast was, we would feel the way I felt when I saw Friends or Living Single. And the blessing is that it felt like that every day at work. Every day at work, I would show up and the chemistry that we all had together, particularly me and Diarra, but really the rest of the cast, was really authentic and genuine because we liked each other. We loved working with each other. Everyone was ridiculously talented and everyone also has their own lane that they occupy. So with me, backstage, I would just kind of make sure that Diarra was okay. Because I was like, you're executive producing this, you're starring in it, you're a mother, and I love my little nephew who's running around. It's like, are you good? And she was like, I'm fine. Are you good? And I'm like, I'm fine. So the time to play and just have fun was actually on screen because there was so much to do behind the scenes. And so what you guys see on screen is very real. We really support each other genuinely. We really love each other genuinely. And so that was one of the easiest parts of the project.
Yeah. And I know you won't want to give too much away because it's so gripping and but like does Mr. T start to get a little drawn into Diarra's mission?
Every time you have a friend who has got something dramatic going on in their lives, we all get a little drawn in. So Mr. T actually gets kind of dragged down the rabbit hole. It's a true mystery, and I don't think that people of color get this kind of show often. We don't get the kind of shows where the person driving the seat is a person of color, let alone a woman. And so Mr. T is definitely, especially as the truth teller, gonna be right by her side to make sure that she doesn't go off the rails. But when you're that protective of a friend, especially in these kinds of stories, like I said, you can't help but get drawn in. This is the Matlock that we love. This is Murder, She Wrote. This is a dark comedy. We get a little How to Get Away with Murder, Murders in the Building. But again, we've rarely seen these kinds of stories told by a cast that is, predominantly people of color. And so Mr. T is down for the ride for sure.
Yeah. And it has flavors of all those shows, but feels so fresh too. So, yeah.
I think the freshness comes from the fact that Diarra herself is so quirky. And she's kind of, to be honest, cast herself with some strange birds. It's one of those strange things where like all of us have got our own little level of awkwardness and quirk. And when you bring us all together, it's this beautiful array of like exotic birds. It's funny. The last time I felt this way, I was talking to Tommy Kail because I did Hamilton on Broadway for a little while. And one of the things I told him that I thought was so special about Hamilton was that usually in a Broadway show like that, you have one exotic performer that you pull out for the 11 o'clock number, they bring down the house, and then you kind of put them away, right? And then you follow the everyman. But in Diarra from Detroit, like Hamilton, all of us are a little interesting. no one's really just like straight laced.
Yes.
Herself is kind of wild and crazy. Mr. T is trying to be the grounded force in all of this. But everyone's a little to the left.
Yes. It's so true though that we don't get sort of um sort of lead characters that are that interesting sometimes, they feel like, okay, they need to be the more sort of neutral ones and like surround them with more sort of quirky characters. So yeah, that's a sort of genius idea from Diarra and really well, yeah, expressed everything. So I'd like to just take you back to Carnegie Hall that you mentioned coming up on the 15th, what it means to you to be sort of one of the headliners at such a world famous New York venue and with this particular show as well, celebrating Motown.
It's a dream come true, and it's a full circle moment. My first Broadway show, I got a chance to originate the role of Marvin Gaye in Motown the musical, and I was asked to come in and be a part of the New York Pops and Stephen Reich and Valencia LeKay, these amazing artists, to do a Motown review at Carnegie Hall, and I literally almost burst into tears because it's such manifestation, answered prayer, wish fulfillment for the younger performer in me, but also the adult in me. I'm kind of closing a chapter, I think, as I start a new chapter by going back to Motown music. One thing I love about that music is even though we all love it now, we have to remember that it was birthed in a time of great division. It was birthed in a time around the civil rights movement, before the civil rights movement, when this country was really torn by racial inequity and everything was black and white. And, I'm getting a chance to sing this music that brought everybody together. Music is the great equalizer. There were black people and white people all in that room together, clapping and singing this music. And it's become classic. Motown music is classic, not only to American music, but to world music. It's so influential. And so to be able to sing this music almost 10 years later after Motown the musical, to be able to sing this music in an election year, to be able to sing this music as I'm starting this new journey as a series regular of all the things I've done artistically, it feels serendipitous. And so I'm overjoyed. I'm not nervous, but I am really focused. I have a lot to do between now and next Friday. And I've got a lot of family and friends coming. So my biggest thing is I want everyone to feel the joy that I feel of this music. And I hope it brings everybody in that room together the way it did when they first created this music.
Well, I know you've got prep to do so, but I'm just going to ask you one last question.
Sure.
Kind of a broad one, and it's for your favorite piece of LGBTQ plus culture. So it could be theater or a book or a TV series, a film, piece of art, or a person who identifies as LGBTQ plus. So someone or something that's had an impact on you, resonated with you, and why.
I think that's so unfair of you. Ask me that question when we only have a few minutes. This is what I'll say. I'll bring up these two people because I feel like they were such heroes of mine in the theater, and no one in the mainstream knew who they were, but they are being celebrated in this moment. And those two heroes, friends and mentors of mine that I would like to celebrate in LGBTQ culture are Billy Porter and now the famed Coleman Domingo. These were two men that I could look up to and identify with. Their artistry, their dedication, and their willingness to share their wisdom and their journey with me as a young performer, just getting to New York in the early 2010s was invaluable. And now to see them finally get their flowers, it makes me want to cry at this moment. We know that Coleman is nominated for an Oscar. And I know it's not just about the awards, these kind of man-made golden things that we create to celebrate ourselves, right? But I do think his legacy lives on in all of the other artists that he's influenced, and I am definitely a beneficiary. I love Billy, I love Coleman, and I would not be the artist that I am without their generosity and their willingness to reach back and pour into younger queer artists. So those are the people that are at the forefront of my mind right now to celebrate in queer culture.
Bryan Terrell Clark, thanks so much.
Thanks
And
so much.
yeah, break a leg for Carnegie Hall.
Thank you so much.